Michael McKee is no longer just facing 2 charges of aggravated murder. I want to show you this. This is the 5-count indictment that just dropped out of Franklin County, Ohio. That is where Columbus is. An Ohio grand jury indicted McKee on 5 counts Friday, and he is now facing 4 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of aggravated burglary. And we also just learned through this indictment some new information about what McKee allegedly had on him the night that he allegedly committed this terrible, terrible crime. Now, right now, McKee is in the Winnebago County Jail in Illinois. That's where Rockford, Illinois is located, about an hour and a half west of Chicago. He was a surgeon, vascular surgeon at a medical facility in Rockford, Illinois, and he was arrested near his place of employment, according to Columbus police. Right now, McKee is awaiting extradition to Ohio, and that is where he will face the charges in connection to allegedly killing Monique and Spencer Tepe in the early morning hours of December 30th. Now, I want to remind you, because there's been a lot of information that has come in over the past couple of days and some new information that we have uncovered when it comes to who Michael McKee is and how we got to this point. How does someone go from being a vascular surgeon? This is the type of surgeon that works with veins and arteries. You have to be incredibly smart and incredibly skilled to be this type of surgeon. How does somebody go from that to now being a killer, allegedly accused of taking the lives of your ex-wife and her husband with young children in the house? So let's dive into this. McKee, again, this vascular surgeon who worked at this medical center in Rockford, Illinois, up until his arrest. And he was arrested by federal ATF agents last weekend near his place of employment. Allegedly, it was a Chick-fil-A where he was arrested. We are hoping to get more information about what actually happened there during his arrest. And also, we're working to learn more about what work was like for McKee as this vascular surgeon in the months, the weeks, the days leading up to the murders of Spencer and Monique Tepe. Now, McKee's connection to the Tepes, as I said, it is through Monique. He was once married to her. Her maiden name is Sabatursky, and Columbus police have yet to say what they believe specifically was the motive for McKee to allegedly carry out these murders. But they did say at a news conference that they consider this a targeted attack, and they say it was an act of domestic violence. Now, McKee and Monique divorced in 2017, so this was roughly a decade ago that it appears, went their separate ways. They were only married for 2 years. The divorce, it seemed amicable when you looked at the court documents, but obviously there's a lot more to the story. After the two were married in 2015, and they moved to Virginia, where McKee continues his training to become a vascular surgeon with a residency in Roanoke. The couple actually bought a home. They owned a home in Roanoke as he continued this residency. The marriage, though, for as promising as McKee's medical career appeared to be headed, the marriage was falling apart, and it fell apart fast. On May 2nd, 2017, Monique Tepe, then Sabatursky, files for divorce in Franklin County, Ohio. The complaint for that divorce reads that at the time she filed, she had been living in Ohio for more than 6 months. And McKee, he was still in Virginia, continuing his surgical residency. And the complaint goes on to say that the couple didn't have kids. She wasn't pregnant at the time that she filed for divorce. And the reason she was filing, quote, plaintiff states that the parties are incompatible. Now, there's a lot of rumors out there about what this marriage was like. Earlier this week, Anjanette Levy of Law&Crime spoke with Rob Misla, who is Spencer Tepe's brother-in-law, and he talked about some of the verbal abuse that he believes was part of this marriage that Monique had to her ex-husband, McKee. Today, we did learn some clarification, though, on the divorce that I do want to talk about, because when we looked up the couple's divorce case at the very beginning of this, we saw that there was an entry from June of last year, and it showed that there was a hearing scheduled for September 2025 in this case that was done in 2017. USA Today is reporting that the case was reopened for a clerical error. So a little bit of context on that part of the story. Now, when we look at Monique's life, she moves on. She marries this dentist, Spencer Tepe. The two marry in 2020. They have these 2 children who are now 1 and 4 years old. McKee, though, he goes on with his training to become a surgeon, leaves Virginia in 2020 after graduating from residency, does a fellowship, it's been reported, in Maryland, eventually he makes his way to Las Vegas. And this is where things get sketchy because he works for the surgical group. And it appears he had some professional issues in the months leading up to the murders of Spencer and Monique Tepe. There's this lawsuit filed in 2024 accusing a physician's assistant at the surgical practice where McKee was working of inserting a catheter incorrectly before a 2023 procedure. And the catheter allegedly broke, and an 8.6-inch part of the catheter was left in a patient's body, according to the lawsuit. Now, McKee was named not because he did the procedure, but because the plaintiff argues McKee was responsible for training this PA on how to put the catheter in correctly, and they say he didn't. Now, it's not as much the lawsuit that is what is really sketchy for McKee. It's how it apparently he responded to the lawsuit and what it unearthed about what maybe he was telling his place of employment. So the company that's trying to serve him an amended complaint say that they tried 9 times to find Michael McKee last year, starting in September, about 3 months before these murders, and they couldn't do it. They went to his address multiple times. At one point, there was a TV that was on and then turned off, but nobody came to the door. And what made it even more concerning was this company goes to Michael McKee's employer, this surgical practice in Las Vegas, and a doctor there says they have no idea where he is. And they say he just disappeared. And then on top of that, they say that McKee's surgical license for Nevada expired in the middle of last year over the summer. Right now, he has an active surgeon's license in Illinois where he was living, but there's also one that was active in California. Now, to this point, looking at the path that Monique was on and McKee was on, and as much as it appears they went their separate ways, well, it seemed that way. But then, of course, everything changes on December 30th.
This individual, Spencer, works with me, and he did not show up to work this morning, and we cannot get a hold of him or his family.
He didn't show up to work?
Correct.
Okay. Does he have medical problems or?
No, and he's been reliable, and we cannot get in touch with him, his wife, his family, anybody that lives in that house.
Okay. So
There's
you're
2
in
kids in the
Florida.
home. I'm in Florida. I own the business. I was informed by my employees that he was not at work, and he runs the office.
Now, that's the first 911 call that came in from Dr. Spencer Tepe's work when he didn't show up. His boss called, who was actually on vacation in Florida, because coworkers were calling saying that Dr. Tepe, who loves going to work and is always reliable to be on time and be at the office, didn't show up. Now, as police were dispatching units and getting to the Tepe home to do a welfare check, and originally the first police officer sent to the house went to the wrong address, but a friend shows up at the Tepe's home concerned about their well-being, and that's the person who goes into the home and says that they found Spencer dead in a bedroom. Police say both the Tepes were found inside the house on the 2nd floor with multiple gunshot wounds.
There's a body. There's
There's a body inside?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on 1 second. Let me get you on the line with the medic, okay? Stay on the line.
Now, Michael McKee was arrested on January 10th in Rockford, Illinois. Police have yet to say what type of communication they had with McKee during the investigation that made them believe that he is the person responsible for killing Monique and Spencer Tepe. But in their news conference, the chief of police was incredibly confident that they have the right person. Now, initially, McKee was just charged with 2 counts of murder. Those charges were then upgraded to 2 counts of aggravated murder. Then on Friday, and this is where we get to this new information that we're talking about right now, McKee is indicted by a grand jury on 4 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of aggravated burglary. Here is the indictment that we have at Law&Crime. And you take a look here and you can see the counts for aggravated murder have a specification for the use of automatic weapon / silencer displayed or brandished firearm. More specifically, in the indictment, quote, it reads, the grand jurors further find and specify that Michael McKee had a firearm that was equipped with a firearm muffler or suppressor on or about his person or under his control while committing the offense. In plain terms, it appears prosecutors believe he had a silencer on the gun that he allegedly used to kill Monique and Spencer Tepe. Now, when it comes to that Now, fifth charge, the aggravated burglary charge he is now facing. The grand jury believed that there was enough evidence to prove that McKee trespassed into the home of the Tepes and either was in possession of a deadly weapon or attempted, threatened, or inflicted harm to another, which we know he allegedly did, both qualifying factors according to Ohio law. Now, we also know that police believe that they may have the murder weapon that was used. McKee lived in this luxury condo building in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood, and these are images that his neighbor sent us of police in her building after McKee's arrest. There was an officer posted outside his 12th floor apartment for 24 hours a day as that investigation continued on. The Columbus police chief said that inside his apartment, they found multiple weapons, but they also say they found one that they believe they have a preliminary link to that is tied to the crime scene. Local media had reported before an arrest was made that some shell casings were found at the crime scene. So very, very critical evidence as they're building their case. Now, you also may remember this. This is the person of interest video, and it showed someone walking in the alleyway behind the Tepes home around the time that they were murdered, between 2 and 5 o'clock in the morning on December 30th. This person wearing all black, this person looking away from cameras, and they say that they believe that this person is Michael McKee, and it was, according to police, the video surveillance cameras that they asked the public for that was really key evidence in tracking that person of interest, someone who they wanted to talk to. They say that person of interest then went to a vehicle, and it was a vehicle that arrived shortly before Spencer and Monique were killed. And then the vehicle left shortly after, going to Illinois, and the vehicle was registered to Michael McKee. One thing that we don't know of at this point, even in the entry in that indictment that talks about the aggravated burglary charge that Michael McKee is now facing. How was he able to get into Spencer and Monique Tepe's home? That is still a major unanswered question at this point. Again, police have said there was no sign of forced entry into the home. McKee is currently in the county jail in Rockford awaiting extradition. He made his first court appearance last week. It was very brief, and he waived his right to an extradition hearing. So now it's really on Columbus police, who say that they're in the process of working out the logistics on getting McKee to Ohio if for whatever reason he's not back in Ohio by a week from Friday. So January 23rd, there is a status hearing that is scheduled in his case. What was your reaction when you saw that this was the arrest that Columbus police made?
I wasn't surprised. Obviously, we talked about this before, that it was somebody that one or both knew. The question that comes to mind is, why now?
Yeah.
Why so far after the divorce? She's apparently moved on. She's got a family now. Why now? And how did he get in?
Marriage in 2015, so they would have been late 20s, and then they're divorced in 2017. We'll see what other details come out. The marriage documents just say they were incompatible. He keeps the house in Virginia, and then she had moved to Ohio, and don't know how much communication they had over the years. From what we know from police, what seemed to be the mistake allegedly that McKee made was they were able to track him through the neighborhood cameras that we saw, that person of interest picture, which perhaps I haven't had official confirmation that is him, but let's say it is. And then it goes to a vehicle. The vehicle goes to Rockford, Illinois, or Chicago, or wherever it was, and they're able to piece it together with him. What more evidence, though? Because certainly an ex-husband in the area, in a car, right before a woman and her husband, his ex-wife, are killed, and then leaving shortly thereafter, and he lives in another state. To the public, that is incredibly suspicious. But when it comes to proving a case in a court of law, what more might law enforcement need?
Well, you have to prove that it's him. I mean, okay, we know it's his. Say we got cell phone records. We talked about if that person in the alley was in fact him, and his phone number hit off the cell phone towers, it's an odd number. It's a number that shouldn't typically be there. But that's his phone. And I've had many a trial where the argument is, okay, well, you tracked the person's phone. How do you know he had it? You tracked the person's car. How do you know he was the one that was driving? These are all defense questions. And these are all things where not only do you have to determine that it was his stuff that was there, you have to determine it was him. And I believe, your investigation will clearly show that it was him. Obviously, you have to overcome these things when it comes time to trial. An arrest is one thing with probable cause, but proving somebody guilty is a whole different thing. And you have to prove that not only was his stuff there, but he was there.
If he didn't have his cell phone on him, and let's just say there were, you have this video of him in the area, and then in a car that arrives before and after, you're proving that he was in the area. But when it comes to shooting and killing two people, what's the bar when it comes to making an arrest? Because it's easy to say like, okay, he was there, that could be our suspect. But then, is that enough to say we're going to get the arrest warrant and we're going to take this to another level? And now he's going to face these two charges of plotting and planning to allegedly kill the Tepes.
There's a big difference between probable cause and beyond a reasonable doubt. So your threshold for probable cause isn't that high. I mean, a reasonable person with all this evidence that we know about, not including some of the stuff they may have, like maybe something from inside that house that they produced, that they made evidence to say, okay, we have probable cause to say it was him. Threshold for probable cause is not that high. Reasonable doubt's a lot higher. So I think the probable cause with his vehicle, with his stuff, with his phone and his vehicle being around there, if in fact they have that, I think that's enough for probable cause.
Because in the criminal complaint, it does talk about identifying him on the neighborhood surveillance, and then the car, that is his car, they say, that then they trace to Rockford where he's arrested. What information are you required to put in a criminal complaint? Like how many of your cards do you have to lay out? Because it doesn't seem like they're laying out a lot and still remaining some things close to the vest.
Well, they have a lot of theories in this case, I'm sure, that they have to prove. So you don't need to do that in a probable cause hearing. Probable cause, you just have to say, a reasonable person would believe that a crime has occurred and this person did it. So the threshold is, like I said, low, and you don't really tip everything. Again, it all comes out anyway, because during the discovery phase, you can't have any surprises in the prosecution. The defense has to have everything that you have. So eventually it's all going to come out. And there's an investigation that's still going on. There's a search warrant that was executed in Chicago yesterday. All that evidence has to be sifted through. Do we have tolls? It's just about a 7-hour ride from Columbus to Rockford. So, and a couple of those are tolls. Do we have tolls? Do we have him stopping, using a debit card or credit card at a gas station to get gas? These are all things that you don't necessarily have to put forward in probable cause, but you need to get together for your prosecution.
The investigation took roughly 9 or 10 days to be able to make this arrest. And I think it's easy for the public to say, well, if you had him on surveillance video, and you have this person of interest, and then you follow to the next surveillance video, and then you have this car, which through a license plate reader, let's say they have that, then you can tie it to this person. Shouldn't this have been a quick arrest? I know the public, there are people in the public who could say that this was a, kind of a, I'm not saying this, but it was an easy line to make from one to the other. Like how much work does it actually take to piece together something like that, of tying him to this crime, to also kind of piecing together all of that video and tracking him down?
It takes a while. I mean, 9 days is not unreasonable. And we can think somebody did something for 10 minutes into the case, but you have to prove that. You have to get to that probable cause threshold. And you're also talking about, you're not making an arrest across the street from where the crime occurred. You're making an arrest in Illinois. So you have to make sure you have a warrant in place, obviously, and that warrant is disseminated to other law enforcement so they can execute it. So it takes a while to get that stuff together.
We do know more now about the divorce between Michael McKee and Monique. Now, both of them went to Ohio State for college. They were both 39 years old. And after his undergraduate degree, Michael continued on at OSU, graduating from the med school there in 2014. Monique and McKee married on August 22nd, 2015. And there is that wedding picture once again from that day. Now, after they were married, they left Ohio and they moved to Virginia. That's where Michael continued his training to become a vascular surgeon. He did his residency in Roanoke at a medical college there. Now, Monique and Michael owned a home in Virginia, but even though the couple were supposed to be starting their forever lives together, this marriage was not going well pretty early. On May 2nd, 2017, Monique filed for divorce in Franklin County, Ohio. That is where Columbus is located. Now, we have the complaint that reads that at the time that she filed for divorce, she had been living in Ohio for more than 6 months, and McKee was still living in Virginia, continuing his surgical residency. The complaint goes on to say that the couple did not have any children together, and Monique wasn't pregnant at the time that she filed for divorce. Now, the reason she was filing, quote, plaintiff states that the parties are incompatible. Now, we don't know much more at this point about what made that marriage so incompatible. It appears that McKee and Monique dated for a couple of years at least before they were married. This is a picture that we found of them together at a water park with friends in 2013. It's unclear what happened in their marriage to cause Monique to live after a little more than 6 months of being married and for them moving from Ohio to Virginia. Roughly a month and a half after Monique filed that divorce document in Ohio court, this divorce was granted on June 16th, 2017. And this here is the divorce decree. It reads, quote, "The parties are incompatible, and as such, the wife is entitled to a divorce." It goes on to say, quote, "The marriage contract existing between husband and wife is hereby terminated, and the parties are hereby released from any obligation of the same except as set forth in the separation agreement." Now, you can see on that day in June, both Monique and McKee signed the document ending their marriage. And we have the separation agreement. This is what lays out some of the details of the divorce. And this line here caught my eye, considering what McKee is now accused of. It goes, quote, "Each party shall have a right to privacy in their individual residences, except as allowed herein, neither party shall enter the residence of the other without permission of the resident's spouse and only with prior approval. Husband and wife may and shall be free from interference, authority, and control, direct or indirect, by the other, fully as if she or he were single and unmarried." Now, perhaps that is standard wording for cases like this, but still it's perhaps a shad for. Now, perhaps that wording in a document like this, it's standard for cases like a divorce, but it's still a sad foreshadowing for what allegedly happened inside Monique's home on December 30th. Now, as far as physical property, McKee got to keep the house that the couple lived in Roanoke, Virginia, and each got to keep their vehicles. Now, this, in the eyes of the court, was a pretty quick and amicable divorce compared to how others have gone. We did notice in Ohio court records, though, that there was an entry in their case from June of last year, 2025, and there was a hearing that was listed for September, but it is unclear what that hearing was for, what that entry was about. Joining us now to talk more about this part of the case is family law attorney Randy Kessler. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. And then when we have a case that involves a divorce, you can really help us understand what we're looking at in these documents. I know you read through the same documents that we have that have been released by people, authorities in Columbus. Just what stands out to you about how this divorce went down?
So, I'm never surprised, right? People have asked me, is it weird because it was such an uncontested, simple divorce that there could be some hostility between the parties and that he could be angry at her? No, that's not weird. Sometimes people want out so badly, they just walk away from stuff they'd be entitled to. But I read the documents and you all have them, and thank you for sharing them with me. And I read them. It seems pretty straightforward. He got the house, they each got their car, they each pay their own attorneys, and they walk away. What it sounds to me like is they both wanted out and they didn't want to pay lawyers and didn't want to mess. Or she wanted out because she filed for divorce and there was nothing for him to fight about, right? There were no kids. She was giving him the house. She sort of was smart if she wanted out. She said, you keep the house, you keep your car, I'll pay my own lawyer. So yes, it might have been uncontested, but there's no way to tell what's behind the scenes. What was she really feeling? How was it? It was not an acrimonious divorce. It was not an expensive divorce. Doesn't mean there weren't a lot of bad feelings. Even in the simplest divorce, sometimes there's some bad feelings underneath it all.
Yeah, and they were young, so it's not like they have massive stock portfolios and where things can get really messy. They didn't have kids, but they were living together in Virginia while he was doing his residency there. But she, at the time that she filed divorce, she was living, it appears, with family back in Ohio, and he was still in Virginia. And she's awarded the divorce for the couple being incompatible. And I think we all know what that word means, and then have probably seen relationships where you would describe it that way. But legally, what does that necessarily mean when you're talking about a divorce and it being something that a divorce is rewarded for?
So that's the default. Every state now has, you've heard no fault divorce. That doesn't mean fault doesn't matter. In some states, like in Georgia, adultery matters a lot. It can be a bar to alimony. So you can bring up the fault or the grounds, but really all it means is that if one side says to the judge, Judge, my marriage is over, I find it incompatible, or it's irretrievably broken, or I know there are irreconcilable differences, there's nothing the other side can do to prevent the divorce. The judge has to give a divorce on those no-fault grounds. So that's what they're saying is, it doesn't matter what the reason for the divorce was. One party has declared that it's incompatible, and now the legislature in each state has decided that it's okay to do that. And actually, there are a few states, I think Mississippi is one of them, that you might actually have to prove the reason for it. But in most states, like in Ohio, you can say, my marriage, me and him are just incompatible. And the judge says, well, that entitles you to a divorce. So the judge doesn't need to know the other reasons as long as one side says it's incompatible.
When it comes to, in the way that it was phrased, was something along the lines of like, she was awarded the divorce because they were incompatible. And she was living in Ohio, again, he's in Virginia, and this divorce played out in Ohio court. What does that tell you about whether both parties, I guess, what kind of cooperation from both sides do you need to have for a divorce to go forward?
So the words are always interesting to me. You're awarded a divorce, or when you ask the court for relief, it's called your prayers for relief. It's like you're praying, Judge, give me this relief. So I don't read a lot into the words. They're both awarded a divorce, or they're both granted a divorce. But as far as who cooperated, she filed the divorce, so she was awarded her relief. It's like if I sued you for $10,000 and I won, I'm awarded $10,000. So she was awarded the divorce. But in this case, he also was awarded a divorce. All a divorce is the status. So the judge said, your status is now unmarried. You're now divorced. But as far as who was cooperative, it looks, from my vantage point, like they both cooperated. They used this private judge or private mediator. They spelled out what they wanted to happen. He got the house. He had all the debt related to the house. They each got their cars. So it doesn't look like there's a lot of friction, a lot of fighting, a lot of expense in this divorce. If you just asked me and threw the papers on my desk, I'd say, this looks simple compared to, most divorces. I wouldn't expect that there'd be, more fighting. If somebody was mad or angry, they could drag the other one through the mud just for the sake of doing it, right? He could have said, I'm not going to sign anything, even if you give me the house, because I don't want you to get a divorce and go move in with somebody else. That didn't happen. So from the outsider's point of view, it looks like a pretty straightforward, uncontested, amicable, friendly divorce.
What we're talking about today with this malpractice lawsuit, this is all related to something that happened in Las Vegas, and it's related to a procedure that was done on a patient in 2023. And we have the documents that are related to this lawsuit. And we'll walk through like what the lawsuit is about, but really the important part of this story, and again, why we think it's important when it comes to the context of what was going on in Michael McKee's life in the months leading up to the murders of Spencer and Monique Tepe, is how it appears he responded to it when the court tried to find him. Now, the lawsuit is still active, and it was first filed in May of 2024. And this is a paragraph where you can see right there the name Dr. Michael David McKee mentioned as a defendant. This lawsuit claims that a man went to get a procedure in July of 2023 at Las Vegas Medical Associates. And the suit claims the man had a medical condition where the veins in his legs have trouble pumping blood back to his heart. The condition's called lower extremity venous insufficiency. And the suit claims that a physician's assistant who worked under Michael McKee allegedly performed part of the procedure. And the PA allegedly, according to this lawsuit, put a catheter, and that's the tube that's often used to drain urine. She puts the catheter into the patient. And the lawsuit claims that the catheter was not put in correctly. And because of that, it broke and it left an 8.6-inch portion in the patient's body. It sounds incredibly uncomfortable. And this lawsuit names Dr. Michael McKee because he allegedly was responsible for training the PA who put in that device. And he allegedly didn't train that PA or train them very well, according to this lawsuit. So now we have the background of why Dr. McKee was named in this malpractice lawsuit. So let's talk about where things, according to these court documents, get pretty sketchy. So this is the document that lays out the attempts that the court made to serve Dr. McKee with an amended complaint, where someone has to physically go and hand it to him. And we have records that show that the people who were tasked with finding Dr. Michael McKee couldn't do it. After 9 attempts, it's like he just vanished, according to these court records. Now, starting in September of 2025, so roughly 3 months before McKee allegedly killed Monique and Spencer Tepe, there was this first attempt that was made by someone trying to serve Dr. Michael McKee. On September 30th, which is exactly 3 months before Spencer and Monique were killed, the person trying to serve the paperwork says he went to the address that was listed for McKee in Las Vegas, and there was no answer, and it was all quiet. This happened around 7:30 in the morning. So then the next day, the person returns around 10:45 in the morning, same address, and this time it appears someone is home. They write, quote, heard TV. When I knocked, the TV was shut off. I rang the bell and knocked several times with no response. So 8 days after that, we're at October 9th. An entry reads that they spoke with someone named Dr. Peter Caravella at Las Vegas Surgical Associates. Quote, he said he has no idea where Dr. Michael McKee is now. Said he just disappeared. Now, when you look at that, we're not talking about someone who's like a small-time doctor. This is someone who is a vascular surgeon. He's not just some small-time employee that just disappeared. This was a main figure at this practice. And according to the people at the practice where he was working, he was just gone. Now, later that day, the person who's trying to serve Dr. McKee goes back to the address that was given to him and the one that was connected to McKee. And once again, there was no answer. Nobody was home. And the person also writes that they found out that McKee's medical license in Nevada expired in June of 2025. The document states that they kept searching and they found another address in Las Vegas. But when they went to that house in October, on the 20th, the woman who answered the door said McKee didn't live there and she didn't know who he was. So WSYX TV, which is one of the TV stations in Columbus, they actually interviewed the attorney who filed this lawsuit, who said that the address that the surgical group gave them for Michael McKee, it was, quote, a fake address. He also said, when you think of who could be accused of a double murder, and this is a lawyer who files malpractice lawsuits, so he knows the medical profession. He says professionally, a vascular surgeon is at the bottom of the list of people who you would suspect would be accused of such a horrific crime. And he said having a situation where they are potentially giving a fake address and hiding from being served, it's just very unusual. Now, we know after Las Vegas, McKee moved to Illinois, and the address that's listed on his arrest documents is for this ritzy condo building in the Lincoln Park neighborhood of Chicago. And we spoke to one of his neighbors earlier this week. She took these videos of police when they were at her building following McKee's arrest over the weekend. And that neighbor told us that McKee, he was often alone. She met him last summer for the first time on the building's pool deck. And she said that he was pleasant, but again, he was often alone. And it's certainly just shocking to everybody who lives in that building that now someone who lived amongst them, alongside them, would be accused of such a terrible crime. Now, this week, Columbus police said they found multiple weapons in the apartment in Chicago where McKee lived. And one of them may be the murder weapon.
This was a domestic violence related attack. As we know, McKee is the ex-husband of Monique Tepe. We can say that we have the suspect's vehicle on neighborhood video surveillance arriving just before the murders and leaving shortly after. Detectives were able to link this vehicle to McKee. The vehicle was located in Rockford, Illinois, and evidence was found that showed McKee in possession of the vehicle before and after the homicides. We can also say that multiple weapons were taken from the property of McKee, and there is a preliminary link from our NIBIN to one of the weapons that ties it to the homicides.
So this is part of our interview with McKee's former neighbor who gave us the videos of the building and inside the building where they had a police officer parked 24 hours a day for a period of time outside his unit on the 12th floor. And this is just what she said stood out to her about him now in hindsight.
I knew Michael McKee because here at the Pierre, we have a pool and we have a barbecue pit upstairs. And last summer, I met him. He was a new resident. And I introduced myself to him, and he was a very pleasant man. We didn't discuss about jobs or anything like that. I just told him about the building and how nice it was, and welcome to the Pierre. And the Air and Water Show is the best place to see it in the city because they come right in front of us. And it was just very nice, very pleasant. And we would pass each other, coming into the building and the elevator, and I even forgot his name, I'll be honest. And I would say hi, and he'd say hi, and I'd say, wow, we're tired, long day. And he'd, yep, long day. we never had any other conversations after that.
So McKee lives in Chicago, but it seems like he had a pretty good commute. He worked at OSF St. Anthony Medical Center in Rockford, Illinois, which is about an hour and a half west of Chicago. Police said that ATF agents arrested McKee not far from his place of employment last week. And then he is booked into jail in Rockford just after midnight on Saturday, according to county jail court records in Rockford, Illinois. Joining us now is Patrick Provenzal, trial attorney. Thank you for being with us once again here on Law and Crime as we continue to make sense of the many layers to this story. We're talking about this malpractice suit out of Las Vegas. How serious, like when you read through the documents, like how serious in terms of malpractice lawsuits that a surgeon could be named in? I mean, how serious was this one?
Well, I mean, it's serious to the victim, of course, because the patient, because an instrument was left in them that resulted in some very severe complications. Unfortunately, in terms of the prevalence or frequency of these kinds of things, it happen far more often than anyone would like, but that you would really think. You can look at the statute in Nevada that actually allows for these types of lawsuits without what almost always is otherwise required, where you have a physician who practices in the same area of medicine as the doctor in the case, who's read the records and then says, yes, there was a malpractice or there was a breach of the standard of care in relation to the manner in which the patient was harmed. Here in this instance, where a lot of times surgeons leave sponges or instruments or other things, this one just broke off, which would really suggest some real mistake that was made during the course of this procedure. It's the exception to the general rule where you would need a doctor to say, yeah, that was malpractice or is negligent. In Nevada, apparently that's not even required for this type of circumstance.
Because when you look at Michael McKee, and just from what we've been able to learn about him, clearly he's accused of a terrible, terrible crime. But professionally, it just stands out to me that this is someone who, good student, was like a good athlete in high school, goes on, and like to become a surgeon is a lot of school, a lot of work, and you probably have to pass a lot of bars. They're not letting everybody be a vascular surgeon. And so there's probably a level of trust. And then you see, for as strong as his career was, like here's this lawsuit a couple months before. We don't know if there's any connection or whether it impacted his mind, but it certainly was in 3 months before this all happened in Columbus. How much of a problem would it be for a surgeon's career to be named in a lawsuit like this?
Well, I mean, it's always a problem.
Right.
Oftentimes when, I guess it's how high profile is the case. Oftentimes these things are under the radar to the general patient population of a hospital or of a doctor's practice. And really the only way that patients ever find out about these kinds of things is to look onto the medical board listings on the state websites to see if malpractice claims have been filed or settled, or if a physician's ever been disciplined in relation to some mistake or malpractice in the way that they took care of a patient. But in general, these are common in the overall scheme of medical practice. Doctors are human like anyone else, and they do make mistakes no matter how smart, how credentialed they are. Obviously, in a case like this, it's a very obvious and apparent one. But I don't think most people have the motive, much less the knowledge to know where to look and to look and see, has their doctor ever had anything like this happen? But unfortunately, these things do happen quite frequently.
And it's important to know, like, he wasn't the one, according to this lawsuit, who allegedly put the catheter in allegedly incorrectly. It's the PA that did, according to the suit, and then he was in charge of training that PA, or the suit alleges that he was responsible for that. So that's how he got brought into this. Now, it does seem like it's uncommon for the things that were listed as far as trying to get in touch with him and to serve him this complaint. And the part that stood out to me wasn't just that you had the knock at the door, the TV turns off and nobody knows where he is, but it was talking to another doctor who said, we haven't seen the guy. Like we don't know where he went. And it's like, he's not, not that it would be okay if like a small time nurse did it, but like, this is a surgeon that just seemed to vanish to the people in Vegas. What did you, like, how common is that when you look at these cases?
not common at all. I mean, there's so much that's really unusual about this particular lawsuit just all by itself. And then you throw in the apparent connection of this gentleman to the allegations of the double homicide in Ohio. I suppose it makes sense why he disappeared if they're related. But you have a whole series of things here that just are very unusual for any practicing physician.
This 5-count indictment, from what we can see on court records online, what do you read into that?
Well, it looks like an indictment for aggravated murder, which is the top charge. There are really 6 different possibilities under Ohio law. Aggravated is the top charge. It carries the top penalties, and in fact carries the possibility of the death penalty, although I don't see any indication yet that they're seeking that. And it's usually based on premeditation, which, if you look at what we're hearing about this indictment, seems to be what the authorities think happened here.
And there's the other part, the specification on it is use of automatic firearm / silencer, displayed or brandished firearm. Does that mean that he used a silencer allegedly in these murders?
I'd sure like to see the actual indictment. I know you just said you're looking for it. That would maybe indicate it, but it does suggest potentially that a silencer was used, and that would be a huge factor in this case.
Yeah, and of course there's a lot of details we don't know, and then we're working still on, at the time we're recording this interview, of getting the indictment itself. Going from, he was originally facing 2 counts of murder, then that gets upgraded to 2 counts of aggravated murder. Of course, he's accused of killing 2 people in Spencer and Monique Tepe, but now he's facing 4 counts of aggravated murder. Why would that be?
I'm not sure, unless it's under different theories. You would expect 1 count per victim. There are 2 victims, so there were 2 counts the first time. But maybe if one is under a firearm specification and one is under some other theory, there could be multiple counts for the same victim. I've seen it laid out like that sometimes.
And he was indicted by a grand jury in Franklin County, Ohio, where Columbus is. I know there's that kind of cliche line that people can say, like the ham sandwich, you could indict a ham sandwich, but what really did prosecutors do to get to this point where he's been indicted? What does this mean for the case going forward?
Well, it's not totally easy to get an indictment. It is, the reason they talk about it that way is because you only hear from the prosecution in front of the grand jury. You don't hear from the defense. You don't get a defense. Witnesses don't get cross-examined. So it's pretty easy relative to proving someone guilty beyond a reasonable doubt at trial. It's relatively easy to get an indictment. So the prosecution would have gone into that grand jury with whatever evidence they have. And if they have proof that this individual traveled from Illinois to Columbus, arrived at the home in the middle of the night, had a gun and or silencer, and then left and went back, and obviously there is proof that 2 individuals have been killed by gunshot, that's probably enough to get an indictment. If on top of that, you could show any kind of records, we don't know what authorities have in terms of evidence they might have unveiled about this individual's internet search history or his texts or his phone calls or what else was going on in his life. They could have added some of that to the picture too, but it sounds like more than enough to get an indictment here.
And I know we're still at the very beginning. I mean, he's still in Illinois at the time we're talking right now. He hasn't even come back to Ohio. We don't know how long this could go on until there even is a trial in something like this. But he's been indicted on these 5 counts. Does that mean, who knows what his cell phone history will find? Who knows what else, what other evidence could come forward? How could prosecutors even add more charges? Like, how does that process work of, if there's more evidence, you add more charges? Like, do you have to go in front of a grand jury, continue to go in front of a grand jury as you're building your case if you want to add more charges?
Generally speaking, if you were going to get additional charges as opposed to additional evidence, you would go back and get a superseding indictment if you had something else. Now, if it's just more evidence, right, he's been charged with aggravated murder. If it's just more evidence to prove that it reaches that level, they don't need to get a new indictment. They just have more evidence.
And for the police in Columbus, authorities in Columbus, they're still working out getting him back to Ohio from Illinois. How does being indicted by a grand jury impact, I guess, that part of it, and maybe the urgency to get him to Ohio to face these charges?
Well, it should make it easier. And by the way, Chris, I think we've talked about this before. I grew up in Columbus, so that is really my hometown. Spent a few years there, and the fact that you have him indicted makes the extradition process a little bit easier. He may even waive extradition. I don't know if he has counsel yet. He might even waive it and just come to Columbus voluntarily, because fighting that is not going to be a winning proposition. Nobody avoids extradition on a murder charge in the United States of America. So sooner or later, he will be in Columbus to answer these charges.
And there's a long way to go when it comes to what his side of the story is, what a defense could look like. But whoever his defense attorney is, I know he did waive extradition last week, and now he's kind of just waiting for, Columbus police to figure out their logistics to get him back to Columbus. He had a public defender at that hearing. As a vascular surgeon, I mean, I'm sure he financially did pretty well where he might not qualify for a public defender. Or maybe I'll ask about that. I mean, if he was someone who was making six figures, like, is that something where he would be forced to then hire a personal defense attorney as opposed to like having this public defender, which he did in Illinois for a very brief hearing?
Well, first of all, I forgot that detail that he waived extradition. Secondly, so often a defendant will get a publicly appointed defender right at the outset while they're still in the process of selecting someone to represent them. And especially where he's going to need a Columbus-based lawyer. I shouldn't say need. I mean, I guess he could do it with an out-of-state or some combination, but he should want a Columbus-based lawyer who knows the laws of Ohio, who knows the jury pool in Ohio, who knows the prosecutors in Ohio in case he wants to make a deal. He should get somebody local if he can. I don't know. I do business litigation, as you know, and I never make any presumption about someone's wherewithal. There are plenty of people out there who have made a lot of dough and don't have money for one reason or another. And I understand this individual has some litigation against him, so that might be a factor. So I don't know what his financial situation is. He should be entitled to a public defender probably in any event.